will work, and if not, I'll try again. So Sean YGG Anderson and I have been working on some questions that various people had related to the way that praise was distributed and then converted into impact hours. So we're trying, my focus, and I think Sean would agree, I've really been trying to work off of the questions that were raised in a May meeting that people had. I've just been going down this list, trying to determine what we can say in response to these things. So before the data could be analyzed, it first had to be cleaned quite a bit. And this is not a criticism of anyone's process. It's just that because this was not created with the intention of later being run through this, there are inconsistencies with things. So I'm not going to go over the cleaning process, but I just want to point out that took a lot of the work to get to a place where we could see things. So the first question I wanted personally to look at is, so you see my analysis results right here. These are things from the meeting that people wanted, that people had questions. So the first one, and I don't know who said any of this because I wasn't at this meeting and it doesn't. The first one was, what is the Gini index? So my personal style is to over-explain. So there will be someone who watches this at some point who doesn't know what the Gini index is, so I'll just try to describe it now. Standard measure of income inequality. It's typically used for nations or countries. So it's a standard measure of income inequality that anyone uses, and there are some criticisms of it, but no one thinks that having a high Gini index is a good thing. It means that the rich are very rich compared to the poor. The people who criticize typically that some countries that they believe don't have high enough Gini coefficients. So there are criticisms of it, but no one says that it isn't a good measure of income inequality. And so this is a map of the world with color coding by Gini coefficient. The highest Gini coefficient is South Africa, which is between 60 and 65. And some people say, like the UN recommends that this number should be under 40. So someone requested that we do Gini coefficient analysis of the impact hours. So we did that. And you can see from this histogram, this is a histogram of impact hours. You have a lot of people who have a very low number of impact hours, and then you have a few who are extremely high, going up into the hundreds. And like you see that distribution activities like book sales, real estate ownership, winner-take-all distributions are really common in human activities. So I was trying to determine if the impact hours distribution actually fit this Pareto winner-take-all distribution well. So a Pareto distribution is something where the top 20% of the population has 80% of the wealth. So the question is this this is sort of the model you would expect for something where you have people doing things like this, because some people are really good at getting impact hours and some people are not for various reasons. So here's the initial breakdown. The top 50% of the population has 97% of the impact hours. Top 20% has 84% of the impact hours. The top 10% has 66%, and the top 5% has 50%. I should have multiplied these numbers by 100. There's a decimal to percentage issue there. So that suggests it does fit this distribution we would expect. And then the cumulative distribution function, which this is, so when you hit an XY coordinate here, it is the X is the number of impact hours, and the Y is the probability that a randomly chosen individual in this population will have less than that number of impact hours. So like if we go here at 100, then X is 100, Y is about 0.9. So that says that there's a 90% probability you have less than 100 impact hours. Does that make sense?
Yes.
There's always the risk of over-explaining or under-explaining. So please stop me at any time. Cool. So this looks like what you would expect for a Pareto distribution, the 80-20 rule. And so I actually now plot the CDF for a Pareto distribution in red against the CDF of our blue, and I think that's a pretty close fit. So just as a statistical mathematical observation, they would say this data looks like a Pareto distribution, which is, again, what you would expect with things that people do, like number of goals scored in soccer also follows a Pareto distribution. So that was just something I thought was interesting. And then we looked at the Gini coefficient. So the Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality, which doesn't necessarily mean unfairness. It could be that the work is also unequal and the distribution is just following the work. I mean, there's no value judgment here. But the United Nations does set a warning level of 0.4. They say that any country that has a Gini coefficient of higher than 0.4 should be considered highly unequal, and intervention should be taken to try to address that. So that's a baseline number that we can keep in the back of our minds. This is just me calculating the Gini coefficient with some Python code. And the Gini coefficient for the impact hours distribution is 0.79. So if it were a country, it would be by far the most unequal country in the world in terms of distribution. But this may not be fair. I mean, some people have basically dedicated their working lives to this project, and then some people have shown up for one meeting. So it's a very wide range. So to try to make this a little bit more, maybe to look at it more pragmatically, let's take the top 50% of the people who got impact hours. And if you take the top 50%, then the Gini coefficient is still would be the most unequal country in the world at 0.64. Coefficient is 0.44, which is still higher than the warning level. So it's an extremely, extremely top-heavy distribution with the highest percentage of awardees getting an extremely high percentage of impact hours. So that is what I have to say about the basic shape of the distribution and the Gini coefficient. Is this making sense? Are there any questions or thoughts or comments that y'all have?
Yeah, I think like the economy is not the impact hours. Impact hours is just like a little part of the economy. Okay. With the actual parameters we have, it moved through 25% to 10% at max goal. So yeah, like the economy is like mostly going to be held by bakers. It's just a part.
So what do you think would be a better thing to measure?
I honestly, I don't know, like, because we're comparing it with other countries, and I would like to compare it with other crypto projects. I think it would make more sense. And again, like, we should compare it like with crypto projects at a building stage, not like, you can compare Genie with Ethereum, Bitcoin, and also like with Ethereum, like at the beginning of the project. And I think it would make more sense that compare it with countries that we're not a country. But yeah, I feel like the job being done here, it's awesome, and yeah, it's super cool.
So maybe better to compare with other things that aren't countries. That's a very valid point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you know, what we compare it with, but also understanding that what we compare it with, there are some pretty good examples and pretty bad examples. And I mean, I think the Gini coefficient of Bitcoin is I don't remember exactly the number, but I'm pretty sure it's quite high. I think Jessica was looking into it. But I also think that's not a good bar to aim for or compare with, because I think we're kind of blending the, you know, the crypto space with decision making. And I completely agree with you, Zepi. You know, I don't think Gini coefficient is the be all end all. It's just one way of looking at distributions. And I also agree this is not the entire economy, but this is the builders pool subset of the economy. So we can kind of look at it as like the builders economy within the larger TEC economy. And I do agree that, you know, comparing Gini coefficient with a nation state isn't a one-to-one parallel. But I also don't think comparing to Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptos are a one-to-one parallel either. And I think we're kind of balancing this crypto paradigm with democracy paradigm. And I'm curious how the Gini coefficient and both backdrops, and also kind of as an abstract measure of distribution within a group of people.
Yeah, the thing is, like, it's a very small project. Like, you could also compare it with, let's say, One Hive, like similar projects. But I don't know. It's tough because you really don't know, right? All these projects are new, and you don't know if they are good or not. You just, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to know how to compare it. But yeah, let's just try to find a solution.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm not saying it's a problem either. Inequality is not necessarily injustice or unfairness. But I mean, just quantitatively, it does have a very high degree of inequality. That's what the calculations show.
I think it would be helpful because now, like you said, there were a lot of people that had just like coming to a call types of contributions and builders economy, like Jeff said. It might be hard to measure like what is the amount of work that people did. So maybe a good point would see the categories of like the types of work that existed, and then within the were the most praised or the categories that have more impact hours, and then looking from those categories, I think we'll have a better sense of what is fair or unfair, because then it's type of work.
Okay.
I'm going to add one more thing, actually. This is really fascinating. First, it's cool to look at it this way. And of course, praise is extremely subjective. And there's another, I'm really curious. I don't know if it'd be too difficult to do this, but the deductions for people that are compensated, I wonder what the Gini coefficient would look like for if we didn't do those deductions. If everyone actually received their full impact hours, would that still have such a large Gini coefficient? More even out, because there would actually just be a lot more, it wouldn't be so top heavy, I actually suspect, perhaps would be the case. And it would, I don't know if it's possible or too difficult to do, but it would be interesting to see what it would look like before we had changed the impact hours, because the people who are compensated are, most of them have their impact hours reduced by 85. So it's not a small amount, it's kind of a big amount. And that might actually change, that might actually be part of what's causing this inequality that we're seeing, inequality of distribution.
So let me record the questions in the notebook so that, or the thoughts in the notebook so that we don't lose them.
And it would also be interesting to know if it is actually still a high Gini coefficient after we look at the full impact hour distribution without the reductions. That might be the case as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would still be high because it's like Octopus is as like a small group of people who is working like daily or like working full time, let's say. And then there is like a long tail of people that maybe just join a call or just shop once, or maybe they did a work like for a low period of time, and yeah, that things create inequity.
Yeah, that would certainly be true for the 100%, but for the top 50% or top 20%, I wonder how much that would change. But yeah, the long tail is inescapable, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be super.
Yeah, there's also a point of the people who are not being so seen. That's what started most of the discussion. If like this small group of people that have been collaborating the most, is it everyone well represented there from the people that have been collaborating a lot?
I mean, it's hard, but honestly, we were distributing impact hours every 2 weeks, and it was transparent, and we all knew about that, right? But I don't know. Yeah, it's that like what happened. I mean, we were seeing it all the time.
So the second question that we were asked to address was, what was the impact? What would be the impact of universal? What if everyone were given a what if everyone were given a baseline universal basic impact just for joining the community? So a few things that were requested: how much hours change the distribution? Can we visualize the distributions before and after the UBI would be applied? So we tried to do that, and it's not hard to do. I mean, UBI is easy to apply. You just add the same number of hours to everyone. So UBI does, I mean, as you would expect, UBI has a major impact on Gini coefficient, and you can drop it. Like if you gave everyone 100 impact hours to start with, you can drop the Gini coefficient down to basically 0. If we were shooting for this goal of 0.4, which is what the United Nations would say, then you're looking at giving everyone about 38 impact hours to start with, which would be pretty radical. But that's just what the number would be if we were setting that as a goal. Sean, visualizations here that are really nice that would allow you or anyone to play with. You can look at the different top percentage of hatchers, what the UPI would be, and then what the Pareto beta coefficient would be. So that's pretty cool that you can just slide the bars and see what happens. And so then you can, without needing to write any code, you can see, oh, and then it also compares the Pareto distribution to the, so that's nice for non-coders. You can use that interactive visualization. So Sean said he would recommend, this is not me, this is Sean writing this part. He would recommend a UBI intervention of 25 impact hours, which would take the Gini coefficient to 0.37. And then the top 50% would have 72% of the impact hours, top percent, and the top 1% of the population at 10%. So I don't disagree with that assessment that one thing that could be to give impact hours in a fairly large number, and that would definitely that would adjust the Gini coefficient if that were a desired outcome.
I think UBI would be worse. Like you are not like the problem here. Like is like some people is feeling unrewarded, and giving 25 impact hours like it creates an inflation on the total base, and these people are also not feeling rewarded enough. Like people who just join one meeting once, like the first day of TSC creation, and he never show up again. Like he will have the same reward like these people who was not feeling rewarded, and you know it's like and also creating reducing value on contributors, and also not rewarding the people who feels unrewarded, because it's like efficient, but with like I don't feel like any of the parts would feel rewarded. It's my opinion.
Questions we've answered. What is the Gini index of the distribution? What does the distribution look like? And now we have a tool where you can, if you're concerned, you can investigate how UBI would affect that in terms of, you know, a certain number of UPI maps to a particular adjustment in the Gini index. And so we've answered those two questions, I think. So these are interesting questions about if we change the paid contributor discount rate, or we change the price of governance, or we looked for duplicated praise. I have not done anything with those, so I'm not going future work to investigate. Okay, then we're getting into the question of, and I want to talk about some of these things just broadly, so the community can see some of the issues with the data set and what proceeding with trying to categorize might look like. So the data set is a weird, it's 8,000, about 7,000 praises is about users. And if it were bigger or smaller, it would be much easier to analyze. If it were like 500 praises, if it were praises or 200,000 praises, we could do it much more easily with algorithms. Because of the size it is, it's kind of right in the middle between being too big to analyze by hand, but it's a small enough data set that it doesn't really meet a lot of the assumptions that you would want for using algorithmic analysis. A lot of challenges in terms of cleaning it, and it's sort of the question of how much work the community wants to do versus the accuracy that we could gain if we did that work. So I'm going to talk about some things that I've done, but this is not a comprehensive analysis. this is more like just an overview of some things we can do with the data in its current form and what that might look like. And then I'm eager to hear suggestions based on this about directing the questions that we might try to refine and answer. Does that make sense? I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yep,
Yeah,
that all
We
sounds
can hear
good.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is trying to break up by the words that are in the praise, hopefully using that to create categories or recognize categories. So the cleaned data looks like this, and we have who the praise was to and from, the actual text of the reason for the dishing of the praise, the server happened, the room in the server, the impact hours per praise and per person, the validators, the period where it happened, and the creds. And a bunch of this we're going to drop. Also the source, the year, the month, and the day. So a bunch of this we're going to drop because in this particular analysis, we're only interested in categorizing, and who the validator was doesn't help categorize the praise. Even who it was to or who it was from doesn't help categorize the praise. So we're mostly going to focus on why, like the text of the reason for dishing, the server date and room. And so whatever information we can extract from these things are the main focus, and we're going to drop other things. So I wanted to just look at some of this and get a feel for it. So I looked at the list of reasons for praising and just seeing, okay, what do these typically look like? And they're fun to read. There is as you see, the issues are like, how do you deal with emojis? How do you deal with links? And those are things problematic or challenging. For always being around is kind of tough to characterize. And just the normal challenges you have when you try to quantify things about human language, that there's a meaning that's more than just word count. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning. One thing is I made everything lowercase, which will help the algorithms recognize things better. So then I looked at the distribution by the praises for the impact hours. So so the minimum is 0. And you have this, again, the right skewedness, which is not uncommon. The highest one is 0, but the 75th percentile is at 1.9. So the most impactful thing was 24 times more impactful than the 75th percentile. I don't think I did a histogram, but it would be extremely right skewed. There's still some missing values where there weren't impact hours that are in the data. So I dropped those because I can't use those for anything. And then made sure everything was still coherent after that. And then dropped a bunch. I think that for this particular analysis of categorization, they're going to be helpful. And in particular, I wanted to stay at things on a user level basis. So I don't think it's helpful to call out particular usernames as being over or under rewarded. So then after I did this, this is what the data set looks like. So this is the information we have. We have the reason for dishing, server date, average percent, impact hour per praise, the room in the server. And so I consolidate the and so that it's in two different formats. And then since this is here, I dropped date, and I should have dropped average percentage the first time. I just wasn't being careful. So now we have a even more streamlined data set that has just the reason, the source, and the date, which I think are the most useful things in terms of this kind of categorization.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
Now you were showing like the categorizations, and I know at the beginning of the project, like there was some intentions on, depends on what room the price was done, and it has some process. And then like at the beginning when Griff and Levy were quantifying price, it was being done, but then after doing it, and we just were giving price like more subjectively, let's say. And it would be super interesting to, if it's possible, to have like all the prices having on different rooms, like let's say Common Swarm, Token Engineering, Common Stack, CatCat. I don't know where else we do price, and have like the percentage or yeah, how like the are feeling like, yeah, just know the data. It would be interesting.
Okay, I think we get into that a little bit, so we can definitely do more of it if you think that's valuable.
Yeah, I think that would be super cool, and especially like if we could compare it with how like at the beginning of the more accurate, and I feel, and compare it like how evolved after.
Cool. We can definitely look at that. When we get to the end, will you remind me to write that question down as a future issue?